Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 25th episode of the Zicast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ziax, and today I'm joined by the director of the Q in LA program, Andrès Rosende.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Of course, and I'd like to thank John Na for being our technical director. And of course, this isn't exactly the studio at Quinnipiac. We're here
Mm-hmm.
at the incredible Seven of Geese office in Burbank, Los Angeles, California.
Indeed.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on, Andres. I'd like to kind of get into things. So, how about you tell us a bit about yourself?
Oh, just like that. That's a big question. So, well, my name is Andrès Rosende. I am the director of the Los Angeles program of Quinnipiac University, and I'm also a filmmaker. I'm a writer, a director, a producer. I During the pandemic, some of my friends and myself created a company, the Seven X, that produces podcasts and new media content where you work at these days. And yeah, I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. I think like independent filmmaking is a little bit like that. You wear many hats, and yeah, I am always trying new creative endeavors.
Yeah, and I'd like to dive into talking about all those hats. So, I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to ask you, what drove you to wanting to become a filmmaker?
Well, I love movies my whole life, right? Since I was a kid, my parents were big movie lovers. When I was a kid, they had like maybe like 100, VHSs at home that I start watching. And then, as I start growing up, that collection grew to like, we threw away like almost 2,000 VHSs like a couple years ago because we didn't have a way to play them anymore. So yeah, my parents got me into loving movies at an early age, and then when I was 16, I was in high school. Movies turned 100 years, and in my hometown they did a retrospective at the movie theaters, and they brought back to the big screen like classic movies, mostly European, but also some American movies. And at that point, I watched movies like Sunset Boulevard or The Rules of the Game, Manhattan, Citizen Kane, movies that you watch in class these days. But I thought they fascinated me, and I didn't know what filmmaking was. It's a little bit pre-internet, so I wasn't aware of like the making of a movie. I just like it, and I thought, okay, I don't know how this works, but I would like to be a part of that. And then kind of like redirected my life from that point on. So I went to study communications in Madrid, and then I went to film school in New York, and then I moved to LA
Hmm.
and pursuing that long dream.
Yeah, so movies really started out as magic,
Right.
just getting to watch them on the big screen.
Yeah, definitely magic, escape, like living different lives. I usually say that some people have church, and they go to church. For me, that feeling was going to a movie theater, like, and even today, going to a movie theater, even if the movie is not great, like the ritual of it,
Mhm.
I still love it and
Big
get like
community.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, and then we all start as fans too. The movies we love, and then being fascinated by that, and then wanting to go into it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, after you having been doing it for so long, like what has filmmaking taught you?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I've always liked the hive mind and the teamwork. So I think filmmaking was a good fit for me. Like the I think that was the most important thing, like how to work with other people, how to make something better and bigger because of all these energies that you put together. And I usually think that when you see that title, a film by, and it's just one name, it usually does not represent what a
Hmm.
movie is, because it's usually a director is like a conductor, or a captain. Like, yes, you are putting all these energies in the same direction. You kind of like the referee,
Hmm.
but you're using all of these people to, like coach. Yes, you win titles, but
Hmm.
it's the whole team. So I feel filmmaking is like that. So it taught me to work with people really well. I liked it from the beginning, but it was one of those things that I became pretty good at. Being pretty confident in myself that the best idea wins, and that sort of like mentality. I think that was very when I got to the US, I thought that was amplified to this idea of like helping people, not just, even as a selfish act, because the energy would go back, people owe you favors and things like that, and versus like trying to be more selfish or keep it to yourself.
Hmm.
I thought filmmaking was a great way to like give and get back, and a community,
Hmm.
and also it's fun, right? Like it's art, and so creative, so interesting. It's a lifestyle.
Hmm.
In At a different level, it taught me to be very resilient, kind of like patient, and have like your mind and like playing the long game all the time, not get too desperate when something goes wrong, not get too happy when something goes well, keep your emotions in check, knowing that you're not as good as people like will praise you, or as bad as people will criticize you, which also had translated into the new media and like, world too.
Incredible, incredible. Because yeah, I like how you acknowledge how much of a team sport making movies is. Because like you said, directors, their names are always all over the film, but it's every department
uh,
is involved in making it.
yeah, and it was until the 60s when the French new wave started, and people studying a certain, collections or retrospective of films, starting putting directors' names at the forefront, right? Like
Hmm.
before that, especially in the classical Hollywood, in the 20s and the 30s, people would go to watch a Warner Brothers movie, or they would watch a Universal movie, knowing that those had certain traits,
Hmm.
versus like, hey, we're gonna watch a Tarantino movie or a
Hmm.
Hitchcock movie. So as obviously the director is an important figure, I just and some artists are way more, their personalities are more important than others.
Hmm.
There's some movies where it's more like a studio movie that the director has less of a. But even in those movies where like very much an auteur movie, very much about this one person's vision, you have to have that full team supporting you.
Yeah. Yeah, and like when you see a Tarantino movie like Reservoir Dogs,
Right.
you know it's a Tarantino movie.
Yeah, you do, and he's definitely one of those like authors, like in filmmaking. Still has a great collaborators, and works always with same DP, same editor, that
Hmm.
sort of thing. So yeah,
Yeah. And I also like how you mentioned like what you put in is what you get out of it, and the sort of like karma in a way. Like you give positive things can come back.
yeah. I mean, to be 100% fair, you usually put way more than you get back.
Hmm.
It's one of those things that when people go into filmmaking thinking about those 15 minutes, the red carpets, or like even like fame, or it's usually a road that leads to depression.
Hmm.
Like this is one in a million, literally, who would make it that way. You have to enjoy the process, kind of like the journey is the destination
Hmm.
sort of mind to really go into this lifestyle. Because if
Hmm.
it's about something else, there's so many other things that you could be doing that will get you there faster.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about the dedication and the passion.
Yes,
And
I, I think that's the only thing that will keep you going, because it's hard. It's a hard choice
yeah.
getting into that lifestyle.
And you very much have that as you're still working. So I'd like to ask you about your new movie and if you want to tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm producing and directing a movie that is also, an original story. I'm doing it with a really close friend. We're co-producing, co-directing, and we came up with the idea together during the pandemic.
Hmm.
And it's a thriller with horror elements, much in the vein of a Hitchcock, an older,
Mm.
type of like movie. Um, and yeah, it's a suspense movie. It happens all in one building, and it's in a public health environment. I'm married to an epidemiologist.
Mm.
My co-partner in this adventure, he's married to an epidemiologist
Oh.
too. So during the pandemic, we lived the situation from a slightly different perspective,
Mm.
and we got all that information, and then we did a little bit of a twist, a genre twist in the film. But
Mm.
it's basically, yeah, this group of like health workers dealing with a huge crisis Now the crisis gets a little bit out of hand and a little more into the fantasy world.
Mm.
It's a zombie movie.
Mm.
And then these people have to survive, and also there's about a woman who needs to save her son who's outside, and outside the world is like all is apocalyptic
Mm.
world, like everything is burning down, but we are inside this building, so it's a very contained building, very contained film.
Wow, that sounds like a fascinating post-COVID story because it's really reflecting on those fears and the kind of just whole dread of that era.
Yeah,
I think you're playing with that really well.
and it was written in the middle of it, and then kind of rewritten later, as in like separating ourselves from from COVID and from the realities of it, because like I think we're all a little bit tired of the pandemic. So, but yeah, it definitely has a lot of kind of like thinking, what would the next pandemic be, and if it would be like something even bigger, how would we deal with that?
And you have that sort of like Guillermo del Toro magical realism kind of element with the zombies too.
Yeah, we have like it's, I would say, like, yeah, that the realism like starts breaking and bringing a little bit of elements of like complete fiction, to make it a little more fun. I the movies that I've always loved and especially love to make are dramas. Things, stories that talk about things that interest me, usually related to families and relationships, but they're always wrapped. The wrapping of the movies a genre, some sort of genre convention, because that's a way like people can have fun, and also I can tell, I can talk about something that interests me. So it doesn't matter if it's immigration, if it's like a family. I think horror or sci-fi or thrillers have, a way to tell those stories in a more fun way than a straight, preachy movie.
Yeah, because they always say to write what you know, but you kind of write what you know and put it into the stories that you can imagine. I
Right.
think that's a really cool way to do that.
Yeah, and that's kind of like always like I felt more attracted to that, and I'm more on the commercial side of filmmaking.
Yeah, and I'm expecting to see Bobby Lee playing a zombie.
Yes, Bobby Lee will have a small cameo, a small part, but yeah, he'll be our patient one.
That's exciting. He'll be quite the patient one.
Yes.
And kind of on that note, I'd like to ask you, since you said you're a jack of all trades, what made you want to enter the podcasting world?
It was one of those things that it happened by accident. Really, that was not planned at all. I was making a movie in Budapest. It was an international movie with American stars and European stars, equity coming from the U.S. and soft money coming from Europe, in February of 2020. So we were just before the pandemic closed the border, before Trump closed the country and all of that. So I was working on that. It was a pretty big movie, Fast and the Furious style, car chases and action. And then we got shut down. So I returned to the U.S. and George and Bryce, who George and I went to film school together, and he produced most of my shorts there. We both have a very commercial sensibility in a school that was very artsy, that were more like, people there were looking more to Europe, and that sort of like filmmaking. Well, I was like, coming from Europe, going into Hollywood, So him and I had a similar sensibility. He kind of like got burned out from movie making and started, he started working at Maker Studios, which a lot of the people who work at 7X are from that world. And so they kind of like a quicker satisfaction in terms of making something this week that will be up, the next week. And that's sort of like versus having to wait 3 years or 4 years to make something, or even like work for 4 years on something that is never going to happen. So when I moved to LA, they hired me to do a few things at Maker Studios and kind of like have a taste of that YouTube world. At that point, we met Bobby Lee. I actually did a sketch with him like in 2012. And George and him hit it off, and they started a podcast called Tiger Belly. And Tiger Belly evolved to become one of the most, reference of podcasting. It's been up for 8 years, and it's been like kind of like the first blockbuster I knew of, like, besides like the Joe Rogans and the big things. Like
Mm.
it was like one of those things. Was the biggest Asian podcast, in the comedy space for a long time. So when my movie got shut down and I moved back to LA, at that point George was starting Bad Friends with Bobby and Andrew. And he said to me, "Well, you have, kind of like your dream got like put on pause for a while.
Mm.
Why don't you help us out with this? Have nothing else to do. We have no money, but we can start something that could be cool." So me having nothing to do and being pretty depressed at that point, I started working with them. I thought it was gonna be like a 6 month kind of like adventure, but working with them, it was so much fun, and kind of like it made me forget all my daily problems. It was
Mm.
the middle of the pandemic. It was one of those shows that really took off because of the pandemic.
Mm.
They were so politically incorrect in the way that I think comedy should be.
Mm.
They would talk very, they would talk about anything and not discriminating about what
Mm.
they would talk about, which felt refreshing. And I think people took that as a sign of like, okay, this is new and fun. So it was a pretty successful show from the start. And then I became a small character in the show. They like my accent, or they like to make fun of my accent. So we end up putting another camera, and the show started growing like that. And then first it was just me with the two of them, and then we started bringing other people, other producers to, we moved to different studios, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And now I think it is, in the world of podcasting, it's a blockbuster.
Mm.
So I kind of like kept doing it because it was fun, and you kind of like, because of the success we were having with that, we can start other shows and doing
Mm.
different things. But so yeah, I guess like I don't know if I answered the question. It wasn't a direct, oh, I'm super interested in podcasting. Actually, it wasn't something that I was doing for fun, listening to podcasts or anything. It was more like, oh, I can work with these talented people and I
Mm.
can bring my 2 cents to it. I saw how other podcasts were edited, so I decided to, okay, I want to do something slightly different. I want it to be way faster paced versus the hanging out podcast. Like, let's make it more like a jokey thing where like the
Mm.
jokes go in faster motion, and if something is boring, I will cut it. Or if
Mm.
and it became that sort of thing, and now it took a life of its own. So it's been fun. I don't, yeah, but
Yeah.
always wanted to go back to filmmaking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy where life can take you.
Yes.
Go from how down that whole process with the movie was to going to do Bad Friends and then creating something really special and really taking those filmmaking skills and putting it into something that's like TV or kind of like radio, where
Yeah.
you just put a camera on really funny people and
Yeah.
create a community around that. So which is something that's so special. And I also wanted to ask you kind of where you want to go next with Bad Friends, or where do you like what's your goals moving forward?
It's a good question, and it's a difficult. I don't have a specific answer. I mean, our goal had always been to make it bigger and bigger. How big
Mm.
can we go with the show? And it has grown a lot, right? Like, it's a show that has 30 to 40 million views a month.
Mm.
I don't know anyone who hasn't seen it on social media, even like a clip or two. So it's that sort of thing. We did a live tour. We did a lot of other things, and now we're doing a spin-off kind of the show into an animated
Mm.
series, which is going to be very exciting.
Mm.
I always wanted to make the Bad Friends movie, and something that we've been working on for a while. It's difficult to line, the type of story where they will
Mm.
both be comfortable with,
Mm.
because it's a big commitment for them and for us to make a movie. They had to put on hold half of the year to do
Mm.
something like this. But I think the audience would appreciate it. So we're trying to see if we find that moment where we can make a comedy with Andrew and Bobby being not Andrew and Bobby, but two different characters, but it still have the Bad Friends energy and the
Yeah.
Bad Friends comedic timing
Mm.
on a fun, action comedy, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, because I know Andrew Santino, one of his favorite movies is Dumb and Dumber. When you had him on SOS VHS,
Right.
and I know he wants to see more movies like that made. Maybe that's a way for you and the team to kind of bring something
Right.
like that back to theaters.
Yeah. So we thought about a Dumb and Dumber, maybe a little more like mixed with something more plotty,
Mm.
with a little more action,
Mm.
so we can have a little bit of our skills and their skills mixed
Mm.
together. Definitely, I don't know if there's s- space for those type of comedies anymore. I don't know
Mm.
people if people are watching that, but the idea will be two of those characters. Imagine like the Dumb and Dumber characters put in a situation in a high stakes situation,
Mm.
um, and have like that sort of like wacky comedy but fun cinematic
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah, just like fish out of water, them stumbling into some crazy
Right.
scenario. I think that would be perfect, and you certainly have the talent to make it.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be fantastic. I think they'll be great for it, and on it. I think they're interested in doing it. And now it's a matter of making a movie. It's a long process and it's
Mm.
like kind of a gigantic puzzle with all the pieces have to fit and they fit for just a period of time. So
Mm.
it has to happen when it happens, and the money, the idea, the actors, the availability of everybody has to happen at the same time for that movie to go.
Yeah.
A lot of times that puzzle gets almost closed, but then something happens and it it you have to start over again to put it back together. It's not like something like, oh, someone cannot do it this month, we'll do it next month. It never works like that because next
Mm.
month this other person now cannot do it anymore. And
Yeah. That's
yeah,
why they're magic. It's
yeah,
kind of like lightning in a bottle in a way. You get all these people together and you make something really beautiful. So,
yeah. So it is lightning in the bottle. It is. That's why I'm saying like it is a lifestyle choice to go into movies. But once you get to be in, working on one, I think it's a very soul feed, like satisfaction. You're feeding your soul with such a great energy. If
mm,
you really love the process.
definitely, definitely. And of course, you have a podcast of your own that you're going to be filming right after this SOS VHS. So I'd like to ask you kind of where your idea for that came from and what made you want to do it.
It was one of those things that it was another team effort thing. We were building a new company, or we were expanding our company, and we wanted to have a podcast that didn't require talent. We
Mm.
called, actors, like
Mm.
bigger people with a big following to be successful. So we wanted to just showcase what we could do in our studio, in terms of set design, lighting, the type of thing that we could present to potential clients or talk to other talent that were
Mm.
interested in walking into the podcast world. So we decided to do something ourselves. The whole team was gonna be the talent and the creators and the technical side of it. So my pitch for SOS was like, okay, what can I talk about more or less naturally
Mm-hmm.
for an hour to 2 hours every week, where it doesn't feel like I'm not Bobby and Andrew. I cannot, if that's the expectation, I'm gonna fail no matter what.
Mm.
I don't have that timing, and I don't have the ability to talk about whatever the first thing that comes to mind, and all of that. And I think also there's a lot of people in that arena, but they are the best. So
Mm.
it's like it was already an endeavor that was gonna be a failure from the beginning. So we went the other route, and it's like, hey, why don't we know a lot of interesting people. Why don't we bring those people to get an interview,
Mm.
like what you're doing right now? Like,
Yeah.
but let's have the frame for that interview, or the gimmick,
Mm.
the angle for that show is gonna be movies. And
Mm.
we thought, okay, and what about movies? What Okay, so what about your favorite movie? And then talking about that is like, okay, what movie would you take to a deserted island? And
Mm.
that was kind of the beginning of that idea of like, okay, it's gonna be in a deserted island, and it's gonna be like people are coming into the island once, every week to talk about that movie that, if not their favorite, is like something that means something to them as something special. And then, so we did that for a while, and obviously we had like bigger guests, and we had episodes that were very successful. And once that we showcased that, we got busy with other things. We made a little lower lift, and Carlos started joining, and we were just
Mm.
more, okay, just the crew talking about movies and taking the guest portion out of it. And my way of doing the first, I don't know, like 30 episodes or something like that, was looking, do a deep dive on the movie, connecting elements of the movie to the lives of the guests. So, if Bobby did Pulp Fiction,
Hmm.
what about Pulp Fiction can reflect Bobby's life? Is it the love for movies and TV and pop culture? Is it the style? Is it the 90s? And like
Hmm.
using that as a through line for the interview. And that was kind of like, okay, that's what the show is gonna be about. That's gonna be the staple. Nowadays it's a little different and it has evolved, and but the inspiration for the show was, can we do something ourselves that is legitimate, um and then can we use it as a platform for
Yeah,
other people.
because it's a lot like how you make movies, or the way that you make movies, where it's a lot about the people, but you kind of lead with the plot and the genre, but it's really about the people. So you kind of interwoven that with a movie, with an interview in a movie. I think that's really, really, really cool.
Yeah, it's a and I love those interviews. I think it was a fun. I got to meet really cool people
Mm.
too. And one thing about podcasting, and something that we learned, or I learned when I work at Maker Studios and all the YouTube world, was like the difference between what we call traditional media like TV or film, and new media, is that there is, in one, there is no relationship with your audience.
Hmm.
Like, it's all like, I make this movie, I have you in mind. I mean, I'm not making this movie for my mom. I'm making it for an audience to like it and to enjoy it. But I'm not gonna have a feedback. I'm not gonna have any sort of interaction. While doing this podcast, the interaction happens every week.
Hmm.
There is a weird things happening, like these parasocial, relationships that we have with an audience. But you can adjust, and you can, oh, look, people are really responding well to this thing, so we can maybe gear our show towards that thing that
Hmm.
people are wanted, or people hate this thing, or like
Hmm.
having their input and their feedback incorporated into the show. So that is a very unique thing about new media, and talking about that community and how important that is, and the people, more than the specific stuff that you're doing.
Yeah.
Everything else is like the MacGuffin, like
Hmm.
Hitchcock would say, that there's excuse to make something.
Yeah. And you kind of allow that community to help guide you. And you're forging a community of your own through the KU in LA program. So I'd like to ask you kind of what led you into wanting to become the director of that.
I've always so my dad is a professor at a university, and I've done a lot of years at a university, as a
Mm.
student. I was always a good student, and I like the academic world. It was an environment that allowed me to be very creative, and I had a great time. My years in school were like great years that I treasure today, And when I moved to New York to do film school, it was like, as a grad student, it's a big school, very expensive school. I had a scholarship,
Mm.
but a part of the way that I was able to make it and be sustainable for me was teaching. As a foreigner with a specific visa, I could only work inside the university.
Mm.
So because I was a grad student and I have studied a PhD, I never did my dissertation because I got the opportunity to come to the US, so I left everything
Mm.
behind. And I always wanted to be more on the making things than in the talking about things,
Mm.
but I like both. So I was given jobs teaching at school. So before even graduating, I was already teaching. So, and when I moved to LA, I was teaching a lot of filmmaking things, and I found it very rewarding to teach. Either like the very first classes, were like, oh, I can open the eyes, of all these people, and to see the world like I said, at the
Mm.
beginning. Like, this is what movies are to me, and maybe get a little bit of my passion into you. And especially the things that I love to do most were like the get to the people who were working on their thesis films, and like at the end of the process, and be more like, yeah, I'm a professor, but it's more like a colleague, that or
Mm.
more of an expert, because I have way more experience to help you craft that script, or the editing,
Mm.
and sitting down with the students and helping them craft their films. So I always enjoy that. So a friend of mine was working at Quinnipiac. This also happened during the pandemic, and I was doing Bad Friends mostly just from my house. It was one of those moments where we would go into the studio. That's how Rudy came to be a part of the show, and then we trained her on how to record, and then we would come after the shoot was over, get the tapes, go home at it. And at that point, a friend of mine who was at Quinnipiac called me and said, "Hey, we don't have anyone in LA. You are already there. You love students. You love teaching and being with them. Would you consider applying for this position and see how it goes?" And again, I didn't have many expectations with it, but I decided to apply. And then I got the job. And my pitch to the school was like, I would like to create a program similar to the thing that I never had when I moved to LA. So it'll be easier to demystify the city, demystify the industry, help younger people to understand how the city works or how to break into the industry, both things. And for those who decide to come back eventually, they can, they won't be scared of doing it. And they kind of like that, and they gave me a lot of freedom to do the program the way that I liked. And I mean, it is an intense thing because it runs year long. And the spring and the fall, I teach a full class, and students have full classes online. And then the intern is an internship based program. So like the whole point of the program is for people to work in the real life environment, right? And then we have also the summer, which is a little more maybe closer to a summer camp. There's no classes, but students intern, and we do activities in LA. So I started doing that. I love the students. I was very surprised, positively surprised. And I started, okay, I get the energy that they bring on, because it's difficult to get an internship. I usually have smaller groups of people that are very driven. So I started, I felt like good doing it, and it was like a good, I can help them, but they give me all the hope for the future. And then eventually, two people who graduated, my first cohort, graduated a year ago. They work here at the company. So kind of creating that community in LA, slowly building that. It was something fun and kind of giving back a little bit. So it's cool.
Yeah, and kind of like what you were saying, that community kind of comes back to help you too. Like, you put in what you get out.
Exactly. Who knows? Also, as a general thing, in this industry, you are an intern today, you might be an executive tomorrow. So those relationships are very important, and networking. And so the more people doing things, the more those people will go somewhere at some point. So those people too. And even if you don't do it for that, it's something that can help you too.
Yeah. I know with the entertainment industry, it's not about who you know, it's who knows you.
Right.
Let's say you ever need a PA for your movie, you have a whole list of contacts of
absolutely
driven young people that you could just call up and they'll help you.
That is true.
And I know a lot of the kids, they look up to you, they call you Pops.
Yeah. Yeah, because the thing with Quinnipiac is most of these students are, I mean, some people are a little old on the older side and they're grad students, but usually they are, undergrads who are for the first time living very far from their families, and without the structure of a school, because here, they have to cook or, make decisions, adult decisions, and I'm the only person here. So I am their dad and mom during that time too.
Yeah. But now you're actually a dad.
Yes.
So I'd like to ask you about kind of what being a father has been teaching you.
I discovered that I can function without sleep. It's something that I always loved sleeping. It was one of those things that I thought I could not operate without, and it was okay, this is interesting. I can sleep for 2 or 3, and also my daughter wasn't a good sleeper at any point. She's 16 months old right now, and she's still not a good sleeper. So I was oh, can I do all of the things that I do without sleep? And the answer is yes. Probably I will age quicker. But I think it's wonderful. I always thought it was gonna be good. If not, I wouldn't go into that. But it's one of those things that, like making a movie, until you do it, you don't know what it is. You can read about it, you can hear about it, but it's one of those things that we're trained, we're programmed. There's instinct going in, and this thing comes along, someone you don't know, you've never met before, and suddenly this new love grows on you that is like, oh, wait a second, now how or why would I love someone I don't know? I don't even know if I like him yet, But so it's a great experience. I think, I recommend it for people who are ready. I wouldn't recommend it at your super young age right now, because I feel like there's so many things to explore, and sometimes when you have a family too young, you have to grow up really quick, and you have to give up a lot of the other things, because now you have to be responsible for other people too. But it's definitely an adventure worth going into.
Oh, great to know. And I know, like, being a filmmaker, there's a lot of sleepless nights there too. So
yeah,
you've been
she might be
trained.
training for that. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. And of course, SOS VHS, it's about favorite movies. So I'd like to ask you, what are some of your favorite movies?
My favorite movies, they are not necessarily the best movies ever, but they are, I mean, some of them I think they are, but they are the movies that impact me the most at a specific time in my life. I haven't seen movies that have had the resonance that these favorite movies had today. Because like when you're like, I don't know, between 14 and 18, I think the movies that I saw in that period of time like made me dream in a way that none other have. Like, and things like Jurassic Park or Pulp Fiction or Jaws and Star Wars, those movies have such a huge impact in my imagination. But also like things that are more classic and less on the genre side, like Sunset Boulevard, and Citizen Kane, and Manhattan, and Rules of the Game, and The Leopard, and so many Volver. Um, I also, in the mood for love. There's movies from all over the world that I really like. That's something also I would recommend. I love obviously Hollywood, and that's why my journey took me here. But I think Hollywood makes one type of film. Indie American movies are slightly different than Hollywood, but European movies, Asian movies are completely different. Different because the cultures are different, the references are different, and it cleans your palate a little bit. It cleanses it. It's a good refresher to see other sort of narration. That not everything has to be ABC, not everything has to be CGI or big effects, that sort of thing. So I would recommend people to watch. There are amazing movies made all over the world, and some of them are like, okay, this could only happen in a different culture. Yeah, like Bobby Lee talks about Old Boy, like it's a Korean movie that I would recommend everybody to watch. It's fun, it's entertaining, but it's different than when they did a remake in the US and it loses the essence, In the Mood for Love is a Chinese movie. I think it's one of the most romantic movies ever made. But Casablanca is also a great romantic movie that I would watch. So I think my love for movies is pretty wide. I have a lot of favorite movies. If I have to narrow it down to like, I would do something like I love Spielberg. I think he is the person in his entourage, that the film brats of the 70s, the Coppola, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, Michael Mann. That generation is the generation that I wish I would have I was born into, and making movies with them would have been the perfect dream for me. And the movies they made, from Star Wars to Goodfellas, Jaws and Jurassic Park and E.T., Godfather and The Conversation. Those movies are the ones who, I would take to that deserted island with me.
Incredible, incredible. And I know you talk about movies you saw growing up. It was in a time where not everything you could imagine could be on screen.
Right.
So there's the beauty of like Star Wars with the miniatures, like we saw at the Academy Museum, like what they were doing with the miniatures and Jaws with the way that they would like play with your perspective. It's incredible.
Absolutely. There's a time where like they're really magicians, where like movies were really the wondering. I think there's a few movies that do that. Star Wars, because there's 2001, right? Like it's incredible. It's something that holds up today. It's a 1968 movie, beautifully done, but it's a very intellectual movie. It doesn't have the fun element, right? Like Star Wars did That, and it was fun.
Mm.
And the way that once you see that movie, every single space movie after that has Star Wars in it. It doesn't matter. You cannot imagine a world with space in space without Star Wars. You know, like the battles, the designs, everything. Jurassic Park is another one that blew my mind. You know, people love dinosaurs. You know, going to museums and not our natural museums. You know, and see the bones and things like that. But now, what you saw it on screen, and even today, it holds up. You know, the idea of like doing visual effects all over. You know, with miniatures and with animatronics and force perspectives and CGI, right? Incorporating that, but just in the right amount, I think makes that movie magic. Today, the problem with today is like you can imagine anything and you can create that, and nothing is gonna shock you. You can watch any Marvel movie. Nothing is. You're not gonna come out of a movie being shocked by what you saw. You are gonna believe that you can see it because you can almost create it with your phone. You know, so I think like that time that a little bit like the 80s, 90s was a little more naive, but it was also more magical. So I think today that's why maybe movies are not as big as they were. You know, and like there's other media that captures younger people's imaginations and attentions.
Yeah, much like this.
Yes, exactly.
Like this. And just, of course, I'd just like to thank you for coming on.
Of
and
course.
for always being a great resource and always a great person to talk to.
Absolutely. It's happy to be here with you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you, of course, leading the program. And that helped bring me here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ryan.
Of course, thank you. And as always, this is Ryan Zicast for the Zicast, where everyone has a story, signing off. Thank you so much for watching.